work with Fairpoint Planning here in Nashville, and we are working on this strategic plan project with WeGo, and we've got several WeGo folks here on the call that I will introduce here in a minute. Also, we have a few Fairpoint Planning team members on here, and I don't yet see Hatch. Hatch is a company out of Denver that is also, they're taking the lead on this study, and Dave Genova is the project manager. He was formerly the GM or the CEO, whatever you would like to call it, out in Denver for several years. And they have a massive system out there, light rail, BRT, the whole package. So we've got heavy gun or big guns on this project in terms of project management, and I'll give you his contact information after the end of this as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and do some introductions. I am going to call you out, and if you would just introduce yourself from either the Fairpoint or the WeGo team. Let's start with WeGo first, and I'm going to go in order with who I can see. So Robert, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Jim. It's Robert Johnson. I'm a transit planner with WeGo Transit here in Nashville. Been with the organization just a few months, but I have a background in railroad operations and railroad management in both Britain and Australia, actually. So I'm looking forward to diving into detail as well as planning scope with this project.
Great, thank you. All right, then Felix.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Felix Gastrodat. I'm Director of Planning for WeGo Transit, and I want to thank everybody that is joining this this virtual meeting. We appreciate your presence, we appreciate your feedback, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you as we go through this study process. So thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, Gabe.
Good afternoon. I'm Gabriel Burgess, the Commuter Services and Special Events Manager for WeGo Star. 17 years, been with the exception of the train since then, and I monitor and oversee all events and train activity, including the day-to-day operation of the Star.
Great, thank you. All right, next in my list, I've got Larry from Fairpoint.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Larry McGugan. I'm a transportation planner with Fairpoint.
All right, great. Thanks, Larry. Kristen with Fairpoint.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Judd. I am part of the Fairpoint team as a summer intern.
Great, thank you. Okay, now theoretically I can scroll. Okay, let's see who else we've got on here. Veronica.
Hi, everyone. Veronica Carter with Fairpoint Planning as well.
Terrific. Okay, thanks. And Fairpoint team, have I missed anybody else? I think I've got everyone on the team. Okay, great. Well, so thanks for taking some time today to learn about this project. We're super excited to be working on it. And
hey, Jim.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Riggs Farrar. I'm the Director of Operations.
Oh, great. Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. All right, anybody else? Okay, so let me just switch over here to the welcome slide. So what is this project? Really, it's a strategic plan for the WeGo Star, looking really broadly at all elements of the Star service. So to give a sense of the things that we're going to be reviewing during this project, they'll be looking at different passenger markets, like what's changed with the passenger market, and I'll talk a bit about that here soon. Looking at station areas along the corridor, what can change at the station areas to make them more attractive to riders, make them more attractive within the communities themselves. They'll be looking at potentially new station areas, so identifying places that might be a good spot for the communities and the addition of new service. Also on the radar are things like connections, transit connections, so maybe bus service connecting to the stations to the airport. So something along those lines, and even considering service extending out further along the corridor to the Wilson County Fair area. So anyway, that's just a kind of an overview, but I think the big element about this plan that I want to make sure everyone understands is while they're looking at everything as we go through this process, they do want the plan to be realistic and achievable in the short and then into the future, long term. So while we would say think big, I think in this case we are saying think big picture, because there are a few constraints that the STAR has to operate within, and I'll go over those here in just a little bit. All right, now Hatch, as I mentioned, is the lead consultant team out of Denver, and with Dave Genova being the project manager on it. He's former CEO out there at Denver. One of the things that Hatch does in their internal meetings as well as public meetings is take a moment to pay attention to safety in our lives, not necessarily safety related transportation, just they call it a safety moment, just transportation, or just safety, like I said, in our lives. So anyway, today's safety moment is consider wearing a helmet when you are biking, scootering, or definitely motorcycling. I know that in many communities, helmet laws are optional, and of course that's everyone's right to choose not to do that. But coming from a medical family, I would say that incidents with accidents with folks that don't have helmets on can be quite devastating. So just consider it when you're hopping on a scooter, if you can have a helmet along with you and just pop that on your head to give you a little extra safety. Okay, so the next thing is, now, Veronica, can you confirm that this is the right numbers that we've got up for our
It is not, but I put the correct number in the chat. So
Okay, thank you. So if you open up the chat box, I am looking for that now. Okay, the number is, you go to menti.com. It'll ask you to type in a code. You can type in 27175361, and that will allow you to ask questions throughout the program. We'll be able to document them at the end. We'll make sure we go through them. So let's see if there's anything else. And then at the end here, we'll have a little exercise where we use this and we ask questions, and then you all will be able to see the results. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the project. The corridor itself, you know, as I've said a lot of these public meetings so far, the corridor, it's a planning project, so it's going to have a couple of maps in it. This corridor is about 30 miles long, currently has 7 stations. This particular commuter rail has notoriety in the country for being the lowest cost implementation of commuter rail in the United States, and will probably stay that way. It was a very inexpensive corridor to operate. I mean, to build, and but as a result of the selection of this corridor, at the time it was built, it wasn't one of the highest density corridors. So the population living along the line at the time of its implementation back in 2006 is when this started, was relatively low. And that's been changing. You know, Nashville's been growing, and there has been development along the corridor as well. And in fact, when the STAR first was opened in 2006, there were only 6 stations at the time. Hamilton Springs was brought about by the cooperation with a developer who saw the potential for creating housing and community around the station, and so that Hamilton Springs station was added. An important thing to note in the whole study process is that WeGo does not own the rail. So it is actually owned by the Nashville and Eastern Railroad Authority, or the National Eastern Railroad, and they run freight on it, and they have been doing that. And so there's a shared agreement between the WeGo Star, the Nashville and Eastern Railroad, and then also R.J. Corman, who operates the freight on the corridor. The study area itself is about a 5-mile buffer around the station area. So if you imagine little 5-mile loops around each of the stations, kind of connecting all the way in to downtown. And I have some other maps. I'll speak to some of that here in a bit. All right, so on the project goals, these they fit nicely into these little bubbles, but they're a little bit more challenging to achieve than just putting them on paper. I want to go over them just very briefly. The first one is meeting changing customer needs, and that is something that's a reality for transportation in general, not just transit. As a result of the pandemic in 2020, ridership travel patterns have changed. And I've got some really cool maps from some early analysis that we're doing on the project that I can kind of share with you. But WeGo wants to make sure that the Star is relevant into the future. And part of that is looking at the passenger market and what has changed with it. It was built primarily as a commuter train, bringing folks in from outside the region to downtown to commute to work. And that market has definitely been reduced as a result of the pandemic and people working from home. And there are other opportunities that the Star can serve, such as special events and things like that. So that's all part of what we'll be looking at for this project. Maintaining a state of good repair, that really is federal speak for keeping the trains up and running, keeping the track in good condition, and kind of maintaining it as it needs the maintenance, not waiting, not deferring maintenance, just keeping it in good form or fashion, like you would take your car in to get your regular oil changes, those kind of things. Another key element is the providing sustainable financial operations. So as I mentioned, they want this to be a realistic plan for the region and for the Star, and the Star does not have dedicated funding right now. So any kind of future expansions that would involve great capital or large capital outlays, such as stations or additional service, would have to be factored in to the financial operations, and how would WeGo be able to pay for that? So that will be one consideration for the study. And as I mentioned, this corridor itself is owned not by WeGo, but by the National Eastern Railroad Authority. So coordinating with them and with RJ Corman as we go through this process is a really critical element, so that we are considering freight growth and what the plans of RJ Corman are as well. And then lastly, and this is really a pretty important one, is making sure that we are working with the communities throughout the corridor to have a positive impact, not just on the region, but within the communities themselves. And we have been working with the folks at like the Lebanon Planning Department and Mount Juliet and council members all along the corridor to ensure that those station areas can become more than just a parking lot that a train stops at. In some cases, you can focus development around them. It can become kind of a community space. What are the advantages and opportunities there that would potentially enhance ridership opportunities for folks, but also enhance the communities themselves? All right, so some of the things to consider as we go through this process, as I mentioned, partnering, common interests, and mutual benefits. So partnering with RJ Corman and the NERA, as well as the communities along the corridor, to identify where things can improve for everyone. So perhaps making some changes to the rail line itself might speed up service for the Star and or speed up service for the freight rail consequently. So things like that where there's mutual benefit. We'll be identifying what WeGo Star peers are doing as well throughout the study process. And there aren't honestly a ton of peers that fall into the low cost category that we do in implementing the WeGo Star, but there are definitely commuter rail peers out there. I will say that one of the things that we've already sort of discovered through this process, and also the Federal Transit Administration is looking at this, is how can commuter rails stay relevant when the definition of commuting has really changed a lot with people telecommuting and things like that. And so it may be that the WeGo Star identifies as a passenger rail in the future and less so as a commuter rail or serving just a commuter market. Here in the center of the kind of little, what are those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 septagons are being realistic and practical. So as I mentioned, I'm going to say this a few times, that WeGo has been adamant that they do not want a study that's going to sit on the shelf. They want a study that is realistic, that's taking a look at existing conditions, looks into future conditions in terms of passengers and what's happening in the communities along the corridor, and identifies opportunities. that can be achievable. A key element of this also will be the scenario analysis. So towards the end of the project, once we sort of narrow down what are some of the service arrangements and or new station ideas that we might be looking at, would be modeling scenarios. So what kind of ridership can be expected? What kind of results can be expected potentially from going through this process? And so there will be a scenario analysis giving a lot of detail on what we think could happen. And then the last is this really a pretty big one, constraints, which include PTC and funding. And PTC is positive train control. What that is it's a safety measure that was put in place for the WeGo Star really in 2018. It started as a federal regulation, was really required to be implemented a long time ago. I think 2015 is when they initially wanted folks to do it, but it's super expensive. And what it is basically just technology that goes on the tracks, that goes on the vehicles themselves to prevent crashes, human error and things like that. And so a lot of the class 3 railroads, the smaller railroads, couldn't afford the outlay to get that kind of major investment. And it also necessarily didn't even make sense to do that for some small train systems that don't have that many trips a day. And so the Federal Railroad Administration allows some of these smaller systems to have what's called a PTC waiver, which Nashville does have. And there are constraints on the service that is then provided. So Nashville has not built or has not purchased a PTC implementation technology. But that means then they're only allowed to operate 12 trains a day, and the trains must be time separated from the freight. So there are windows within which the Music City Star can run that has been negotiated with the railroad and R.J. Corman. So any changes, any additional service to the future, in regular service in the future, would have to require a renegotiation of that agreement. And R.J. Corman has been super great about working with WeGo when they have special events and things like that. And like I said, they're a partner in this process, but that is a real constraint. And if you were a regular rider of the train back, maybe in 2016, 2017, that WeGo used to have a Friday night train. Well, when 2018, that waiver went into effect in 2018, that is when that Friday night train got dropped. All right, so this, I'm getting close to the end here, although I do, like I said, I have some of those preview slides I want to talk a little bit about. But in terms of the background of the study itself, there's really two things that it's looking at. We have the existing and desired services on one side, and then the financial and operating constraints on the other. And one of the things we'll be doing throughout this project is determining a baseline assessment and benchmarks, kind of what's happening with the Star now, what are things that other systems are doing, how do we compare, what does the public want to see, what are the stakeholders along the corridor want to see, what are some of the property owners around stations looking to do. Those will all be things that we'll be looking at. The vision around the stations, as I mentioned, we're working with the planning departments and communities along the corridor and finding out what kind of development plans they have around the stations. What are some opportunities for maybe increased population density, so condominiums or shops that people can stop at on the way to go to the train, coffee shops or retail, all those kinds of things. That's all part of the picture. On the financial and operating side, obviously a financial review. So how is the Star funded now? How might it be funded into the future? And if we were going to add services, what kind of capital costs will be required, and what kind of operating costs will be required to make changes. There will be some changes that can fit probably within existing operating budgets, and that will be sort of the low-hanging fruit, easier implementation type of recommendations. But any of the midterm or longer-term projects that require capital would definitely be a little more challenging. And as I mentioned, they're doing that passenger market assessment. So looking at the passenger demand, what has changed related to that. Same on the freight side. So since the corridor is owned by the freight rail folks, and what are their growth plans? Like how many trains are they expecting to run a day on the corridor, things like that. So all of that's being folded into this project. what kind of community support is there along the corridor as well? So, you know, Star riders are super supportive of the project in general. I think most transit riders, you know, once you get used to riding transit to your as a commute person or in general, it's easy to get addicted to it. And so they're super supportive. But, you know, how else can the communities along the corridor and what level of investment are they willing to make to support any potential changes to the Star service in the future? And then lastly on this, the business case for investment. So the idea being that at the end of this project that we would have in the strategic plan would have a business case for investment. So here's what the cost would be, here's what you would see, you know, here's why we would recommend it. And I would say overall that I feel that the strategic planning results that we're going to get through all this work that we're doing is really the fulcrum here. So the idea being to balance, you know, the existing service and the desired needs with the realities of the financial and operating constraints. All right, so let's talk about the project schedule. This started roughly in January, but really probably February, March, when data started coming in and we started collecting a bit of data on the project and assembling information about the Star and peers and things like that. We are right now in July at the first outreach kind of juncture where we are doing a survey of both passengers and non-riders. It's available to anyone, and I'll have a slide up here in a bit so you can get that and fill that out if you're interested. The draft and analysis is really starting to get into full swing right now. So as I mentioned, I've got a few sneak peeks on some data that we've been pulling from that. In September and October, we should have some of that analysis to share. Probably late September, early October is why that is there. And we'll do another survey at that point to get some feedback. Also, that survey will focus additionally on those station areas and opportunities that exist around making those station areas more engaging in their communities. And then lastly, the recommendations will probably be coming out around November or so, with the project wrapping up in December. Right. So let me get to some of this early analysis preview. Now I'm a transportation guy, so I do like my maps. This is just to give you a sense of what the corridor, what exists in the corridor right now in terms of population. So using census data primarily, how many folks that live on this corridor, how many folks would possibly use this service to get to downtown? And in a nutshell, the darker it is, the more populace you have, more people in that area. And it just kind of gives you an idea that along the corridor, there really isn't a ton of density. It's been changing. You can see some dark spots on Hermitage, a little bit north of Martha Station, and in Lebanon, there's some growth. And this is in 2020. So we do have some 2022 maps that'll be part of the project as well. I've seen some previews of those, and it hasn't necessarily changed a ton in that 2-year period, but that gives you an idea of one of the challenges of providing transit service on this corridor. And this is really when it gets really interesting. So there is a company that we are working with and using their data called Replica Places. And they use census data, other data sets that they can purchase. And the cool thing is data that they get from cell phones. So whenever you are downloading an app and it says, can we notify you? And you go, yes, 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 on the terms of service. Well, if they're tracking you, then they can sometimes provide this information to Replica. And so what this map represents is basically a 15-minute walk shed. So from Riverfront Station, the purple area around Riverfront is a 15-minute walk from there. Then at Donaldson and Hermitage, that is a 5-minute walk, and no, it's a 5-minute drive to the station. And then and Mount Juliet, Martha, Hamilton, and Lebanon all the way out, that's a 10-minute drive. So using the roadway networks and Google Maps, they have identified anywhere in that purple area are folks that have the opportunity to get to the station within 10 minutes or 5 minutes and go to downtown. So once they've got that map identified, then they can pull all that data that I was talking about related to travel movements, you know, using phone data, connecting that with census data, and then they can build information from it. And so that's where I want to get to next. So this is a result of folks going to downtown. So within that purple area around the riverfront station and coming from all the purple areas that were highlighted all along the corridor, this is all travel going to downtown. Now, it's not necessarily people that are riding the train. It's just anyone who lived in those communities and then showed up at Riverfront Station. So they, they are folks that is a catchment area for the STAR. Those folks could potentially use the STAR. The interesting things about this is obviously it's pre and post pandemic. So if you look at it, 2019 is purple. Very obviously it has the higher numbers. But in 2022, when they pulled the data again, basically that travel, those number of trips have been cut in half. So people are still going, they're just not going as frequently. Some other things to note, I think it's a little bit more interesting on the next slide are, and I can come back to these if you all have questions. So I'm just going to keep on going, and then we'll get to them here in a bit. But on the next slide, these are the outbound trips. So these are folks going from that little purple area around downtown to the purple areas out along the corridor. And you can see, again, basically the travel numbers have been reduced roughly in half. But what's fascinating here is that whereas before the peak travel time was 4 p.m., so that's when the roads really jam up, and that's when people were making that trip. Now, if you look at the red with 2022, that travel pattern has changed, and it starts earlier at 3 p.m., and that's the peak. So, and I've said at most of the meetings that we've had so far, we at Fairpoint can attest to this because we have meetings in the region and often drive out of the community. And it used to be that I could leave at 3 o'clock and kind of get a jump ahead of the traffic, whereas now I do that and I'm sitting in the traffic, I'm jammed up, and it takes me 20 minutes, 30 minutes longer than it would have usually. The other thing that I want to point out that Robert Johnson noticed was that at 10 p.m. that stayed exactly the same, which is interesting. And we were trying to figure out what might cause that, if those were shift workers or folks that kind of did the early shifts at the bars or whatever, and just wondering what that is. So those are outbound trips from Nashville out of town. All right, so I know I've been kind of going on here a bit, and this is not the right code. So let's see, where is Menti? We're going to switch over here. Veronica, can you share your screen and then maybe give folks the number again and kind of go through that process? We have a couple questions for everyone.
Yeah.
A little interactive exercise. Great.
So the link to join the Mentimeter should be in the chat. And if you're on your computer, you can just click that link. And then if you're going to use your phone, the same code that's in the chat will work. Just go to menti.com and enter the code 27175361. And then if you are already in the Menti, you might need to refresh your browser so it'll switch the question that's appearing on your screen. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so if you're in the Mentimeter seeing this question, so in 3 words or less, describe what the WeGo Star means to the region. And let me know if you're having trouble getting into the Menti program at all.
Does that show no one's in there right now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Okay, there we go. We have 2. We have speed.
I did want to mention, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier once the recording started, but we are recording this just so folks are aware.
Okay. Speed, convenience, comfort, connection, first rail. All right, awesome. If anyone wants to explain their answer as well, we would appreciate it. Okay, final chance. Awesome. Reliability, green. That's interesting. Okay, moving on. So the next question is, what would you like to see more of in terms of the WeGo Star service? So for this one, we're going to focus on the service. So things like the schedule and tickets and those sort of things. And then later we'll focus on the Star stations. So save those suggestions for a couple questions later. More trips. Connection to the airport, connection to a future BRT, more frequency and later service. WeGo link connections. I think that's a new one. I don't think we've heard that suggestion so
Yeah,
far.
that's good. We
That's
haven't
great.
heard that. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Any others? Last chance. Okay. Shuttle stops. Better pedestrian access. Very good. Okay. Next one is there anything you would like to see less of in terms of the WeGo Star service? And if there isn't, that's great too. AC breakdowns. We have heard about those this summer.
Yes, we have.
Wi-Fi outages. Anything else? All right, great. Oh, none. Love that answer. Okay. Next one is, what would you like to see more of in terms of the WeGo Star station areas? And so this question is also covered on the survey, so be sure to take that as well if you haven't. But this can be things like dining or sidewalks and bikeways, housing. We've
Bike
heard a lot of,
parking.
yeah, I've heard a lot of good answers. So your ideal and vision. Great.
So a TOD, for folks that might be catching this later, is transit-oriented development. And more TOD opportunities would be focusing some of those type of, as a transit-oriented development is effectively development that supports the transit and activates the space often. So, retail, coffee shops, daycares, things like that, plus the residences right there on site or within close walking distance.
All right.
Park and ride access locations, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody want to speak to that who put that in there? You mean use this as a park and ride instead of riding the train or something else?
I think just a lot of folks would ride the train more if they could get to it easier, and it's not always near their house. So if they can drive to it, they could cut up their trip a little bit.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Remote parking for airport. Yes. All right, last call. Okay. And then same as the service question, is there anything you would like to see less of in terms of the WeGo Star station areas? And we have gotten parking before. Anything? All right. We will move on then.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for that.
All right,
Questions?
now we've reached our questions. And you can still submit your questions through this screen as we go along.
Any plans to offer additional afternoon shuttles or stops along downtown, such as stops along Church Street near Amazon, Asurian, NES? Okay. No, I would say that I don't believe that extending the rail further beyond its current locations are really on the radar. But I will say, and I know Felix could probably join in on this, but we did hear at a lot of meetings, the connectivity from stations to not just downtown, but further out, sort of the new, maybe Sobro area, or not Sobro, but Midtown, that the downtown's kind of changing its geography because it's expanding westward, and having connectivity to there, besides just the connecting buses right now, was something that people brought up and how important that is. And then another thing, I guess, yeah, Felix, do you want to go ahead and mention something on that?
Yeah, no, I think the question is about if I read this correctly, about shuttles and connect. My assumption is shuttles connecting to the station in Riverfront.
Okay, like meeting the train, like yeah.
So we don't have any immediate plans for that, but this is part of what this project is about, is also understanding those connections beyond Riverfront. What makes sense, especially since once you get to downtown, if you're not in the immediacy of Lower Broadway, there's other centers that are growing and expanding beyond just the core of downtown. So I think this is, Jim, is something that it's interesting to look into. We can take this information. I know one of the main challenges that we have is that with that shuttle is making it on time to the train for the departures, and that's a lot because of the congestion in downtown. So we'll have to look at what that means, but there is another study that is looking at potential improvements, including transit lanes in downtown. The study is called Connect Downtown, and maybe that's an opportunity to look into what that means and how this service can take advantage of and make it easier to connect to Riverfront in a timely fashion. So I think this is it'll be something interesting to look at, especially with those major employers as well.
Yeah, and I did want to mention also that one of the station areas that's under consideration, again, potentially for longer term development, would be a station between Donaldson and downtown, where folks that don't necessarily want to go into the heart of downtown, but might want to go out to Midtown or other directions, could get off, connect to some bus service that bypasses all that congestion that Felix was talking about. Huh. do you anticipate any changes to the study or implementation opportunities once a new mayor is elected? Felix, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, we don't know. I think what may come out of this. We don't know yet what the outcome is going to be of the election. All I know is that for the most part, from what I've seen, all the candidates running for mayor have been positive and supportive of transit in general. So that will be something that will have to be discussed. I don't think there's any. I think what this study is doing is looking at the reality of what the service looks like today and what things may be possible in the short term, and what other things we can look at, but longer term may require additional resources. But for now, I think I haven't heard anything differently or anything that any mayoral candidate has said about or against the train, or any vision that they may have specifically for how the WeGo Star will operate in the future, or what the level of commitment from Metro will be in the future. So I think the study will reveal those opportunities and what those areas for improvement could be. And our hope is that whoever the mayor is will be in agreement and support. Maybe the approach may change, and I'm trying to continue some of those sources, but as far as I know, I don't anticipate anything major, because what the study will highlight is just what opportunities are based on the data that we've seen, and this process gathering public feedback as well.
Right. All right. Well, and this is being live streamed on Facebook. Are we getting any comments or questions to that? Do you know it, Veronica?
We do not have any questions on Facebook, but they
Okay.
also have access to the Menti link. So
Right. Okay.
submit questions.
All right. Well, okay, so let's switch back over. I just have a few more slides, and then we can open it up to a couple additional questions if anyone has anything specific they want to address, or any slides you want me to pull back up. Let's see here. So I need to share. All right, trust everyone can see that okay. Okay, so this is the survey link that we have live right now. And appreciate anyone forwarding this to your friends, anyone who could take this. At the end of it, once the survey is complete, you have the opportunity to sign up for announcements about the project. So feel free to do that. They aren't connected in any way. The survey is going to go for another couple of weeks. We've already have, do you have any updates on that? Well, we had 1,500 surveys last check. So now, how can you all help? Well, first of all, you've been helpful already by coming out today, showing up and providing your thoughts about the project itself. And then if you want to sign up for the project announcements, that'd be super helpful, because then you'll get more information, find out what's happening and when meetings are. And then the last bit there is just tell your friends and family about it, and your cohorts, let them know, get them to the survey and provide feedback, because we are looking to have the study wrapped up in November, and it is now August. That being said, again, I'm a little rusty with the presentation today. Sorry about that. It's been like 4 days since I had, well, I guess over a week since I did the last few. But anyway, my name is Jim McAteer again. My contact information is up here on the screen. And we are working with Hatch out of Denver, and Dave Genova is the project manager with his contact information on there as well. So with that, anyone have additional questions or thoughts? Just feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll go from there. Or if you'd like to type it into the chat, that could be super helpful as well, because that helps us to capture this for summary later. All right. Well, I don't see anybody having any questions. It's the last opportunity to let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, that will wrap it up here in a minute. Okay, great. Well, thanks again. Thanks for coming out. Please check out the links for the survey and the website project page, and let your friends know. Let us know. You're welcome to email me with any comments, and we will see you in the fall. Thanks, everyone.